Hello painting students, our next project is going to be called a vector composition. You're going to be choosing one color from the color wheel, and that will be your mother color. That will be the color that the whole thing is based off of. And you can see in mine, and it's not finished yet, but you can see in mine it is going to be a red-violet color is going to be the main color in my composition, and we're going to make lighter and darker versions of that to create a three-dimensional image. Okay, so the first point that we have to get into is how to set up this composition. Okay, so you're going to need a ruler, you're going to need a 10-inch by 10-inch piece of illustration board, and for remote students that should be in your pack, and if you're in class I will be able to walk you through this as you make it, but this is to serve as kind of a tutorial to help you begin this process or to review it if you're unsure as to how this works. Okay, so most of it is pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to kind of just set this up and do this along with you. So, like I said, this is 10 inches by 10 inches, so the first thing I want to do is, it was cut on a paper cutter, so it might not be exact, but I'm going to try to estimate the best I can. So I'm going to make a mark at the 5-inch point at the width at the top. I'm also going to slide my ruler down and make another mark at the 5-inch point on the bottom. And I'm going to connect those dots to create a line that goes equally through the board. I'm going to do the same thing to the side, so I'm going to spin this around at the 5-inch mark, again at the 5-inch mark, and I'm going to connect those dots. Okay, the next part requires no measurement. I'm just going to take the point that I created at the top and the point that I created at the side and connect those to basically split these squares into triangles. So I'm going to spin that around. You can see how that one worked out. We're going to do that to all 4 sides. All 4 squares are going to now turn into sets of 2 triangles. Take your time and make sure that you're doing this well. Okay, I've been doing this kind of thing for a long time, so it doesn't take me quite as long, but just make sure that both sides of the roll are lined up. So right now what you have is you have it divided into 4 quadrants, but then those 4 quadrants are divided in half diagonally to create a diamond in the middle of the board. Okay, the next part is the most complicated part of the composition. Basically what we're trying to do is create this little line here, which is an inch and 3/4, and this little line here, which is an inch and 3/4, but not draw the line in between. So we just drew this line. We're not going to just draw an X. We're not going to just draw a diagonal in between. We're going to set the ruler up and we're going to connect these 2 points, but when we hit 1 3/4, we're going to stop, and then we're going to pick up again at 5.5 inches to 7 inches, and we're going to stop, and that's going to give us our 1 3/4, and you'll see kind of how it works out. It's going to be not exact, but it's going to be close. So I'm lining this up, and if you even want to draw right on the ruler, you know, this is the 1.5 mark, the 1 3/4 mark is right there. So I'm just going to make a little dot there, and I'm going to connect that 1 3/4 to the edge. And this can be, actually 5 1/4 makes more sense. 5 1/4 to 7 would also be 1 3/4. Okay, so you can kind of see how I had the ruler lined up with those 2 points, but I just didn't extend the line the whole way through. Okay, and you'll see in a minute why this is important. So again, at the 1 3/4 mark and at the 5 1/4 mark, and you could even draw that right on your ruler if you want, so that you can just easily do that again. So I'm just going to go ahead and line this up again from corner to center. At the 1 3/4 mark, I'm going to extend that to that first corner, and then from the 5 1/4 mark to the 7-inch mark in the center. Okay, so you can see I did that again. I left this part blank in the middle, so I'm just going to quickly go and do the last 2. So the corner to the 1 3/4 mark, the 5 1/4 mark to the 7 in the middle, and one last one, lining up the corner with the center again, the corner to the 1 3/4 mark, and the 5 1/4 mark to the 7-inch. Okay, and so it's not perfect, but it's close. That's good enough for what we're doing. So at this point, we're basically taking that line we just made and we're connecting that to our previously made halfway 5-inch marks that were on the sides. Okay, so you'll kind of see where I stop drawing this line, it's going to connect to that dot, and when I stop drawing this line here, it's going to connect to that dot, and that's going to give me a couple triangles. I'll show you kind of up close in the first one what that looks like, okay? So I just drew this line and this line, and when connected with that, now I have to do it the other side. I know you probably understand how to do this at this point, but this is good review for folks that are maybe struggling with this. So each corner should look like this at the end. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just do that. Now, I know this is kind of boring, but at least watching it done more than once, I think, will be helpful. I'm just spinning this around and connecting those points. So I have 2 more to go. Okay, so this was the end goal. Okay, you can see I connected all those lines from the corner to where that 1 3/4 mark was on every side, and so we're pretty much ready to paint. I just got to fix up a couple of the little marks where they line up to make those as perfect as I can. And so the next stage of the game is to choose the main color for this composition. We're calling it the mother color, okay, and the reason we're calling it that is that's the color all the other shades and tints are going to come from. And then we'll be adding white to it to get the lighter versions, but we'll also be adding its complement or opposite color to get some of the darker versions. So more to come on that. Hello again, painting students. Just wanted to show you kind of a little how far along I am here. I'm not completely finished with this vector assignment yet, but I wanted to show you how to start off the painting process. The last part of the video was just drawing out the image itself with a little measuring, using a ruler and a pencil, and now we've got to look at, and there's a couple reasons why I have more than one of these, ones to like test out your colors on and stuff too, but we're using this printout as like a map to show us, you know, where we need to go dark and where we need to go light. So you can tell like this is how I used it for mine. So you can see these areas are kind of dark and then they're sort of dark in mine, and then these ones are dark here and they're dark in mine, and that's what gives it that 3-dimensional quality. Now, as you get farther along, you start to notice that it's not just a solid color. Eventually you'll start making like areas go from light to dark, and so that's something I still need to do on mine, is transition. But in some of those areas I've gone from a very almost white color down to like a medium color. But before any of that can be considered, you have to mix, we're calling it your mother color, okay? So it's the color that all of the other parts of your painting start from, okay? So in my case, I created, it's a violet, but it's almost sort of like a red violet. I mixed in a crimson and a blue together to get this color, and it's a lot of paint. Now typically, if you know me and you know our projects, I typically don't want you to mix a lot of any color because it does dry out, but we're going to be covering this with cellophane and with a plastic lid throughout the whole process. And what I worry about is if you don't mix enough of the color that you're going to run out, and then it's going to be almost impossible for you to match that color. So for this project, this is kind of your one chance to mix up a large batch of a color that you do intend on using throughout the whole project. And then in my palette I also have some white that you can see I've dipped into a little bit to do my painting, and I have black, which I'm not going to use a whole lot of, and then I also am using a little bit of, I don't have it in my palette right now because I just cleaned it out, but the opposite of my color would be like a yellow green, so I'm going to have a little bit of that on hand to dull down some of the areas that are the darker areas. Okay, so I'm gonna start this process so that you can kind of see how it looks, and I'm gonna probably do it fast so that you can just see this quickly. So for this time lapse, I mixed a little lime green. That's gonna be my opposite of my mother color, but I'm not using that right away. I'm trying to put in a little bit of a tint to my color, so my color mixed with a little white to fill in the areas that seem medium, and now I'm mixing a little bit of that lime green and black and mother color together to get my darkest areas, and so I'm trying to get that in. Now I'm doing this freehand. You could tape it off. The way I look at it is your first layer can be a little bit messy, but you can go back over that later and refine it the second time around, and that first layer is going to be a little bit watered down too. So up until this point, I haven't used any tape, just because I wanted to show you that it is possible to at least start it freehand. I don't think it's a bad idea to start it freehand. If you go over the line a little bit, you can always go back and cheat back and fix it on your next color. But what you might notice is I am purposely trying to pick areas that aren't directly next to each other so they don't bleed into each other while they're still wet. Now the quality of the paint, there's no way I would turn this in at this point. I mean, it's just very inconsistent. But that makes sense for a first layer, okay? You know, it's only after 2 or 3 layers that this starts to look three-dimensional and you can start to see some of the value changes from like light to dark, okay? Now, at this stage of the game, if you want, and you could even do this from the very beginning, I just think it takes a lot more time, and plus sometimes if you use watered down paint for that first layer, which you probably will, it can leak under the tape. But when you're on your second layer, it might make sense to tape some of these off. Now, I always tell people to take some of the adhesive off of the tape before they attach it, and you can just do that by kind of like wiping it on your pants or shirt, or just kind of like, you know, wiping some of it off with your hand. Okay, so if I wanted to put a second layer on this area that's dry, you know, I might go ahead and, you know, tape that section off. And again, I'm just kind of putting the tape down while I'm painting, and then I'm going to peel it off immediately. I'm not going to leave it on for too long. And taking some of the adhesive off on your pant leg or shirt might not be a bad idea. Okay, so I'm protecting the areas around that, and it's all really nice and sealed down. And then that way, if I want to put a second layer, and I believe in this section I kind of had my mother color with a little bit of white in it. And hopefully you can see this second layer just a little thicker. Now I'm using a big brush, which, hey, might be a good idea, might not. It depends on how much control you have. Just because you have tape on there too, you don't want to assume that you're invincible. Okay, so I wouldn't like slather it all over the tape. You still want to try to stay within the boundaries if you can. But that second layer you can get, we're still not applying it like goopy, but it is thick enough that we're not going to see, hopefully, the white of the illustration board. Okay, now I'm using this as a reference to kind of help me figure out how dark I should be making this. Now if I look really closely, it actually goes from light to dark, okay, because you can see there's a difference between these, and that's because it gets a little lighter on this side. So you do want to notice those little details, so I might throw a little more white on this side and then blend that out. It seems like it goes from light to dark, so I get a little more white in that, and then I'll get a little more of my original mother color. Kind of fade that up. Okay, and sometimes you don't get it in the first try and you got to go back and fix it, and that's fine too. Okay, but it seems like that's getting a little better. So now I probably want to be a little more accurate than that, but I'm going to just kind of show you the idea here. And then I would peel that away, and hopefully I get a little sharper of an edge this time around. Now the next one I tape off, I want to make sure that it's nowhere near that one. Okay, you can see that's a lot more, hopefully, crisp and detailed at that point, okay? But I'm not going to put tape on that wet paint until it's completely dry, so I'd want to move on to a different portion of this to tape off and continue. So fast forward at this point, you know, I'm a little farther along, and I'm paying a lot more attention to the small changes within it. So you can see there's a few sections that I still haven't even done the first layer on. I got to do that. But one of the things I'm noticing with this now, you know, is like these two areas don't seem really different enough to me, so I got to go back to my map and really look at it and, you know, ask myself, you know, what do I need to change to make that more believable? Okay, so like if I'm looking at it, it looks like it gets a little more dark in that corner, so I got to go back and make this corner a little darker to try to, you just keep refining back and forth between the photograph and your painting. I realize this isn't in color, but that doesn't matter, because that's going to give you everything you need to know about how dark or light the paint should be. And you can do that. You can lighten it by adding white. You can darken it by adding a little black and a little bit of the opposite of your color on the color wheel. So like I told you earlier, the opposite of the color of mine is like a lime green. So I added, you know, just so you can see how I did this, I have my mother color. I added a little of that lime green, and that dirties the color up a little bit. It makes it more neutral. It's almost like a gray, and maybe a little dot of that black to darken it. And if it's too much, then I can add more of my mother color again. But that would be good for an area that's super dark. So these areas like this that, you know, I want to be very dark and really pop out in high contrast against my light areas, that's going to be how I achieve that. Okay, so for you, you know, if your mother color is orange, the opposite of orange is blue. So you might have a little dot of blue
and maybe you can cheat a little bit and throw a little dot of black in there too to create your darker, rustier versions of your orange. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. I will show you more once this is finished. So here's a couple finished ones from past students. They're not mine, but you can kind of see how it looks at the end. Just those dramatic highlights and shadows. And then eventually we will try to display these all together in the display case to really get that amazing, beautiful three-dimensional effect. You can kind of see it in the display case and how that looks at the end. So that's the goal. It does take some time to refine it, but it's going to be well worth it in the end.